How about this?
Dear Mr. Owen Mahoney,
Oh.
my name is Andrew and I would like to bring to your attention a long-standing issue regarding an update to the game MapleStory that took place in late 2018.
Wonder what he's going to talk
Like
about.
many others, I have been a long-time player of the game and care deeply for its longevity, and I'm concerned that this issue is a small but significant factor that directly impedes this goal. I am writing to beseech you to reverse the game's director's decisions made in 2018 and re-implement the Ghost Ship Exorcist badge, a Nora Sengoku Hake's badge, back into the game. Version V199 and removal of Pottable Badges. The update to version V199 of the game permanently removed the ability to acquire an in-game equipment item badge that is significantly superior to current alternative badges. The name of this equipment was the Ghost Ship Exorcist badge, which was freely and permanently available to all players through normal gameplay. This item, along with another similarly potent item Sengoku Hake's badge, has been made impossible to acquire after the 2018 update. As it is, the only extant copies of these items are now only in the possession of player avatars created prior to V199. These items, often called Pottable Badges, are named so and highly appraised due to their greater potential for player-created upgrades. Current alternatives after V199 cannot be upgraded at all, and are therefore far inferior to what players prior to V199 have. Misunderstood rationale behind V199 changes. Mr. Dennis Bernardo, the game's director at the time, cited the item removals as a fix for potential conflicts with future content and to minimize the differences in power between existing content and new content. Nevertheless, player testing has shown that these items, though far superior to current alternatives, contribute to only about 5% of player performance. There are far more in-game equipment systems that provide a much greater boost to player performance, which have not been...
Hang on, 5%? I thought it was closer to like... 2? 2? Wasn't it like 2 or maybe 2.5 like at best? Okay.
There are far more in-game equipment systems that provide a much greater boost to player performance, which have not been removed from the game and are in fact encouraged, such as Gilux equipment or Breath of Divinity, which may either be freely earned in-game or purchased. Like the badges, these items are also not parts of the Korean-based game. The contradiction only frustrates the player base. Due to the extreme lack of communication regarding these items, which may have been mentioned only twice so far in official channels in 2018 and recently in 2021, players have been forced to find theories as to the precise in-game reasoning behind these changes. The current understanding, besides as a roundabout means to balance player performance relative to the game's challenges, is that the current, most difficult content of the game does provide an alternative badge, which still falls short of the removed badges. Thus, in order to further appreciate the value of clearing this highest level of content, the older, more powerful badges were precluded. There are two misconceptions behind this reasoning, however. It realistically takes many years to even be eligible to access this endgame level of content. Therefore, I would argue most of the player base that is able to clear this content likely already possess either of the legacy badges. The Genesis badge is not the primary reward for clearing the hardest content, rather it is eclipsed by the Genesis weapon, which is the current strongest in the game. Consequences of removed legacy content for MapleStory's longevity. Much of MapleStory's driving allure revolves around perfecting player-acquired gear,
Does
and
his
a
voice
vast
have a
amount
slur?
of time and money is spent to achieve this. Player performance is a product of a multifarious number of sources, which Ghost Ship Exorcist badge, or Sengoku Hake's badge, is just one small piece. Nevertheless, it currently stands as the most lamented divide between player avatars created before and after V199.
No, your brain
Any
is
player or player avatar that joined or was created after V199 has been branded with an insurmountable gap between players with its legacy equipment and those who are too late. And therein lies an injurious flaw to the game's endurance. The diverse classes MapleStory offers represent the core content of gameplay. Players are encouraged to repeatedly create new avatars to experience MapleStory's many classes.
This voice is a slur. Why would you do
which
that?
allows players to experience the same content
Because it's more
from fresh
inclusive?
perspectives. This significantly contributes to the game's enduring replayability. However, by disallowing new player avatars from attaining the Pottable Badges, players are discouraged from creating new avatars that can no longer attain these badges. In the following article, CNBC quotes you as longevity as a principal business model for MapleStory. I could not agree more. Retaining player loyalty and engagement is essential to game longevity and player appeal to invest into their avatars. Yet preventing players from attaining badges not only discourages players from investing in some of the game's cardinal content, It dissuades new player entry due to relative disadvantages they have from being left out of legacy gear. It is my belief the situation continues to mar my and other players' experiences with MapleStory. Through my 15 years playing, I believe MapleStory is a game with which one can personally age alongside with as the game continues to grow and change to new heights. And this situation with these badges is an obstacle to the most important new content the game has to offer. I very much appreciate the time you have taken to read my feedback, and look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you, Andrew.
So there's two major things missing. One is enough arguments for me to be persuaded that this change is really a thing, that is really like negatively impacting the gameplay of people. That's one. And the other one is a reasoning on why, if that is even true, that's something I should be caring about, and the link between like the longevity of the game. Now, I could give a bunch of arguments, and I could give a bunch of supports for it that could potentially work as arguments, but that's your job in writing this letter, that you provide those. I don't see any of those in there. I just see other numbers are lower, therefore change bad. Like, that's what the whole letter reads like. And because because people like me want bigger numbers, therefore bad, therefore revert change. Like, that is what it, that's the only thing I can really distill from this, and I don't think that's a strong enough case. There are a whole bunch of arguments, and I'll give you some examples. Like, some of the arguments you can make is that you think that there should never be any content in the game that is never able to be gotten by anyone ever again. That you think that fundamentally is a broken game mechanic, and you need to elaborate on that a little bit more. Maybe give some examples of other games that did that and that have reverted those changes because of positivity in the community, etc., etc. The other thing is maybe citing more like big threads or like the pervasiveness within the community of this happening, and maybe if it isn't the best thing for the balance of the game, it might be the best to like quench the unrest within the community or something. It kind of touched on that, but that to a lot of people is going to sound like just give the kid throwing a tantrum what he wants so that he stops complaining. That is not something that inherently I think will be strong enough argument. Yeah, it's tough to bend this into something without a underlying like reason why you want this change. Honestly, if there's just enough people who care strongly about this and they all want this, then if that's what the majority of the player base wants, then that's just good. But in general, I feel like you need more public support first, because a lot of people like yelling about it, but I don't know at this point how many people are just screaming Pottable Badge just because it's a thing that they heard, or because it's a meme, or because there are new players coming into the player base, and old people are saying like, hey, you should feel bad because you don't have a badge, and then they start feeling bad because they don't have a badge. In general, on the side, I feel like that's something that you could work on and then like something to remedy on the side if you think that's a structural issue. But I don't feel like it's one of the things that in main you should be like, I'm not saying that the person who wrote this letter is specifically doing that, but I hear a lot of things being disseminated from like meta thought into new, fresh players about how they should be doing things, which also is about like how you should be valuing everything that you're getting based on what could have been gotten at some point, versus that is kind of like a negative light you're putting things in that is not necessary for any new player to have, right? And again, we're pulling it back to the baseline, right? If a new player comes in, their baseline, just whatever they can get is going to be at 100%, right? Every upgrade, every new thing that they will have access to is going to be perceived as an upgrade to their baseline initially, and then it's going to be consumed into the baseline and is going to be back at 100% after a little bit. But if they come in and what they perceive is 100%, and they have people who've been playing the game longer telling them that, hey, what you're perceiving right now isn't actually 100%. That's actually only like 95% or 94%. You should feel bad about what you have right now. Then they're going to adjust that down and feel like they're only at 95% of their potential now. And now any kind of upgrade that would have felt good because it's taken them to 105% is going to feel not as good because it's only going to take them to the 100%, but then after they internalize that, instead of going back to 100% in the first situation, they're going to drop back down to 95 because they're always going to feel like they're missing out on something. And we think what's missing in this whole conversation about Pottable Badges is that there's a lot of emphasis on all of the things that you're missing and the few things that you don't have because you don't have access to them right now. And like I said, there are arguments for that, arguments that I don't personally agree with, but arguments that you can make. And there's complete disregard and never any mention of all of the things that have happened in the past 2 years or 3 years since this change went through that have made progression much faster, much easier. And all of those things seem to be completely just not mentioned because it's, but the underlying thing is because that's access to everyone and the other thing is not access to everyone, right? And that's where the conversation should be about. That's where your strongest argument is about access to the items and not so much lower number bad, higher number good. And like some people have it, some people don't, because there are parties, entire parties, where people are clearing the hardest content in a game and none of them have badges. So it's not necessary, right? And then what even weakens this argument a lot is the mentioning of the items that don't exist in KMS that the game is balanced around, things like Gollux, things like the Breath of Divinity, which I'm not 100%, well, I know what it does, but you know, it's not part of my meta thought because I'm playing in Reboot and it's not accessible in Reboot. But the fact that GMS is already an easier version of the game because we have access to so much more stuff, on top of that, on top of having so much more than KMS does, who is able to clear the game, still putting so much emphasis on this one item. Like I said, like in general, if you think that's like a systematic problem, you can talk about that. But I feel like it's gotten so out of hand where every new player is made to feel like they're like incapable of enjoying the game unless they have the Pottable badge. Their character is just inherently like has a disability, even though as a whole your character is already way stronger than the content it's trying to clear. And I feel like even though you might have an argument there, it's just being used so much to like poison the well, where people are just taught to feel shit about their situation, even though they're in a very, very positive situation about the whole, compared to how hard the game is. And there's a just disconnect in the reality of how strong people perceive their character to be and how strong they actually are objectively compared to the content they're trying to play. And that's my whole issue with this situation. Now, I could probably completely get behind either removing the potential from all the badges that exist, the Hakase badges, or just removing all of them. Personally, I wouldn't give two shits about doing that. I think that would be perfectly fine. But I feel very conflicted about actively supporting suggestions like that when they're coming from someone who is not arguing that from the point of a fair and remotely objective understanding of damage within this game and how much you really need to play content, and from having played through the game. If I feel like it's not coming from that angle, I can't support that because that will lead to other things in the future, and that will give a justification to what I think is a flawed reasoning within understanding of balance and strength within this game. So that's why I would seem very contrarian on the topic of potential badges, not so much because I think I have one, therefore if other people don't have one, I'm happy because I have an advantage. It's of course way more nuanced than that, and hopefully all this kind of explains that to you. Okay, hopefully that'll be enough of a response for the guy who wants to do the letter. But hey, if 1 million people make a letter similar to that, and everyone wants that change, and that's the only reasoning they have, probably from the company's point of view, they should probably listen to it. Because if the people in your game want a certain thing, probably have to eventually listen to them. But yeah, there's a difference between just bending over backwards and doing everything that someone wants just because they scream loud enough versus making a conscious decision for the game balance. And also versus just copying whatever KMS has because it's easier to do as well, and giving shitty reasoning for it. Didn't go into all of that aspect, but yeah, of course, like these kind of changes and the size of the change that it was personally, what happened to me with the changes with the Sengoku, with the Ghost Ship Exorcist badge was that there was an update, and I went to sleep pretty late, and right after I went to sleep, the patch notes came out, and because I went to sleep so late, I woke up late. Wow. I never do that. And then when I woke up, the game had just gone into maintenance. And then when I saw the patch notes, it said like, oh, by the way, we're moving the whole area, so the quest line and the Ghost Ship badges, like all of that is going to be gone too. So like in another universe where I go to bed in time, I wake up like 3 or 4 hours before the patch. I get these badges on like 10, 15 characters, and almost all of them has it. Or another universe where I stay up a little bit later, I see the message, I stay up even later and do all the badges and then go to sleep. But in no situation do I look at those possible outcomes and see like, therefore all of this is unfair, therefore all of my characters who don't have it are like damaged beyond repair, therefore no, because I take a step back, I look at the greater context of all of the sources of damage that exist, I look at the intended balance of the game from KMS, and I see that my characters are definitely way stronger than they need to be anyway, and are capable of more things than is necessary in the game. And besides that, I also don't think that any game has any responsibility to give players equal access to all parts of the game that have ever been there just for the merits of the thing existing in the game. I just disregard that. Like I said before, if I start to play a new game and the players who've been in that game, who dumped tens of thousands of hours into that game, years of their lives into that game, I wouldn't come into a new game and feel that it's unfair that I cannot get an item that they have, even if it gives you a lot of damage and a huge endgame advantage. I would never think that, and I would think it's extremely, is it privilege? What's the term I'm looking for? But like spoiled? But like, what's the $10 word for spoiled? Conceited? To think that just because I showed up late to the party, entitled, yeah. When I showed up late to something where other people had like blood, sweat, and tears and years of working on community and able to get to where they are, and I could just show up and capitalize on that, and I should have access to all the same things with all the same things, and while I have no idea of the struggles that they've gone through and how much they had to work to achieve what they have, and I know that in general, since MMOs in general always like smoothen out the curve and always it gets easier, maybe it's just a complete fundamental lack of understanding that that's a thing, that you just don't know that the game just fundamentally, like progress just in general gets easier. Yes, there are some negatives for sure, and you can probably list like 5 to 10 of them for MapleStory, but if you are fair and balanced and try to be a little bit objective, you can probably mention like 20 to 40 to 50 things. 20 to 40 is a pretty wide margin, but like 40 to 50 things I would say that have made the game easier in return, that overshadow the small difference of the other ones. The only remaining argument is either I don't think anyone should be able to get anything that no one else can get, and I'm trying to get endgame Black Mage, and when I get there, I'm going to have like, 2.5 to maybe 3k stat, less than, if it is 2.5k and people get to, it gets close to 5% then, like 4 to 5%. Endgame stat that I will never be able to get. Which that second argument is true right now, but it'll take you like 2 to 3 years to get there. So I feel like that's a problem that that's like an argument you can definitely make in like 2 to 3 years, if that problem still exists at that point. If you are already getting discouraged from min-maxing, I don't know, man. If I was a min-maxer, I would just see that as a bigger challenge. I just feel kind of sad if it's like I want to min-max in a game, but I don't have access to one item that someone else has. I'm already going to give up before I even try. Let me go to another game where there's like 100% chance that I can min-max and beat people. I'm not going to go into a game where the chance is lower than 100% because that's too much of a challenge for me. I think that's kind of a pussy move.